It is so good to see so many dear congregants at this summer gathering. Thank you for making this special effort to return to Holy Blossom, your spiritual home. I know many of you join regularly through the live stream, and that is wonderful, but we miss seeing you, and there's nothing like being together in person. And thanks to all who have made for this joyful reunion, all the volunteers. And thank you to Leah and Lior for giving us reason to celebrate and to see with our own eyes that the Jewish future is bright. We look forward to celebrating with you. So picture the scene. The Israelite tents are in the valley of the wilderness. And from the peak above, Bilam, the foreign prophet for hire, the best in the business, looks out over the Israelites and prepares to do his worst, intending to curse them. Why? Ki rav hu, because the people of Israel was a lot. There was something about the very existence of the people Israel that agitated, that is described as rav, simply too much, an overwhelming concern, exasperating. The beginning of our parasha explains, Vayagor Moav mipnei ha'am me'od. The people of Moab was very much on edge. Vayakotz Moav mipnei bnei Yisrael. And Moab dreaded the Israelites. So now Bilam, that prophet for hire, is positioned above the valley, poised to do his worst, and says, the king of Moab has brought me to curse Jacob, has commissioned me to tell of Israel's doom. But how can I damn one whom God has not damned? How can I doom when God has not doomed? And then we are told that God intervenes and miraculously turns Bilam's words from curses into blessings. Listen to the so-called blessing that comes. Ki merosh er'enu. As I see them from the mountaintops, Bilam says, as I gaze down upon them from the heights, hen am levadad yishkon. There is a people that dwells alone. Is it a blessing? Does it sound like a blessing to be a people that dwells alone? Some say yes, some say no. Some say maybe these words are neither blessing nor curse, but something else altogether different. And this is what I would like to explore with you for a few moments this morning. Those who say yes, a blessing, to be a people alone, to be a distinct people, to be a small but recognizable people in the world, set apart for a unique role. Surely this is a blessing. Commenting on Bilam's words, Nachmanides, who lived in the 13th century Spain, explains that these words mean Israel will survive for eternity without any nation succeeding in vanquishing it. The people of Israel will remain independent and will never assimilate into the nations of the world. Similarly, Rabbi Chaim ben Ater, who lived in Morocco and in Israel in the 17th century, understood these words of the prophet Bilam, Am levadad yishkon, to mean that the Jewish people will always survive, even after all the other nations of the world cease to exist. And in this way, we dwell alone in the history books. Against the backdrop of history, the Greeks, the Romans, the Persians, and so on, all the great empires will be gone and lost to history, but the Jewish people uniquely, singularly continue. Yisrael Chai. The Jewish people lives forever We dwell alone among the nations of the world because we are an eternal people. So we can look around us this morning and say, yes, right here, we are evidence of such a blessing. We're gathered in this beautiful synagogue right here on this beautiful day. We are living proof that Bilam's curse was indeed turned into blessing. Our prayerful songs, our embrace of Torah, our magnetic pull towards one another, all these testify to the fact that we are indeed an Am Levad Yishkon, a people that dwells apart. Israelis tend to know this phrase from the Torah. Even secular Israelis seem to know it, a people who dwells alone, because the Jewish state is never treated by the nations of the world like any other state. I was surprised to learn that Menachem Begin, the hawk-turned-peacemaker prime minister of Israel, convened a weekly Torah study session. When he came to this week's parsha and read verse 9, Am levadad yishkon, a people that dwells alone, a people that dwells apart, Begin struggled to understand its meaning. And he asked his study partners for insight. And then he turned to Dr. Yaakov Herzog's philosophical anthology entitled A People That Dwells Alone. And the prime minister read out loud to the study table from this book the following. The theory of classic Zionism was national normalization. What was wrong with the theory? It was the belief that the idea of a people that dwells alone is an abnormal concept, when actually a people that dwells alone is the natural concept of the Jewish people. That is why Bilam's one phrase still describes the totality of the extraordinary phenomenon of Israel's revival. If one asks how the ingathering of the exiles, which no one could have imagined in his wildest dreams, came about, or how the state of Israel could endure such severe security challenges, or how it has built such a flourishing economy, or how the unity of the Jewish people throughout the diaspora has been preserved, one must come back to the primary idea that this is a people who dwells alone. More than that, one must invoke this phrase not only to understand how the Jews have existed for so long, one must invoke it as a testimony to the Jewish right to exist at all in the land of their rebirth. Then Begin snaps the book shut and says, there you have it. When we cease to dwell alone, we cease to exist. What a conundrum is this blessing. Now, for those who say dwelling alone does not sound like a blessing to me, it sounds like a curse, you are not alone. You are in good company. The Talmud asserts that all of the blessings which Bilam blessed the Jewish people with turned into curses except for one. How we began this morning, Matovu ohalecha Yaakov. Mishkenotecha Yisrael, how good are your tents. That is the only line of all of those so-called blessings, which was truly a blessing. All the others were designed by Bilam in the most clever of ways, deliberately ambiguous, so that the words could be understood as blessing or curse, with a shadowy, darker underside. Badad, alone. Being alone. What does it mean? Everything hinges on that little word. And so we turn to other places where it shows up in Torah. Maybe from other contexts we can glean greater insight for this context. Badad, according to other places in the Torah, is not a good thing. The very first time we hear of it is in the Garden of Eden. Lo tov hayot ha'adam levado. It is not good for a person to be alone. And so God creates a loving companion for Adam. The word badad shows up again in the book of Leviticus to refer to the person who suffers from illness, from leprosy. It is written, badad yeshev michutz lamachaneh moshavo. He shall dwell alone outside the camp. And when the book of Lamentations describes the tragedy that overtakes the Jewish people at the time of the destruction of the first temple that stood in Jerusalem, the very first verse of Eicha yashva vadad ha'ir rabati am. How alone is the city that was once so filled with people. In the biblical context, being alone is not a blessing, but a curse. You remember, not long after October 7th, across many schools in the GTA, high schools, even in middle schools, there were walkouts, student-led walkouts to protest Israel's response to Hamas's massacre, a war that Israel did not start and does not want even now. A young Holy Blossom student in grade 7 at the time believed himself to be the only Jewish student in his school. And whether or not that was true, when he heard about the plans for the student walkout, he asked his parents, one Israeli and one Canadian-born, "What should I do?" And they suggested he should ask the principal. And so he did. And the principal of that school that day had 3 suggestions. He could eat his lunch in her office during the time of the walkout. He could stay home from school altogether that day, or he could transfer schools. I cannot imagine a more lonely experience. This young student was already feeling separate and apart from his peers, and the principal's response only made it worse. We are feeling the weight of Bilam's words again today. We are Am Levadad Yishkon, the people that dwells alone. It's one thing when other people may say it about us, but what happens when we say it about ourselves? That is a grave danger, and I want to call attention to it today as a kind of warning. How close it runs the risk of being a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we define ourselves as the people that dwells alone, then we are likely to find ourselves alone. And that is not a safe place to be, especially as a Jew. Yes, Rashi says badad means that Jews are indestructible, and Ibn Ezra says badad means that they will never assimilate and be lost to the nations of the world, and Ramban says badad means that we will maintain our own integrity. But it does not mean that we are destined to isolation, to be without friends, to be without allies, God forbid. That would be a terrible curse, a self-imposed kind of curse. That would be a terrible fate, not a grand destiny, and certainly not an identity. That is not at the heart of Jewish identity, being alone in the world. Our ancestors were called upon to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Kadosh, that word, does mean set apart for something great, for something important, for a sacred mission. But there is a profound difference between being set apart and being lonely. There is no suggestion in the Torah that Jews will live alone. God says to Abraham just the opposite. Through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. Abraham was different from his neighbors, but he fought for them and he prayed for them nevertheless. He was apart from them, but never alone. It is vitally important that we reject this idea that we are destined to be alone, that we are without friends and allies. We must believe that the world is capable of understanding us and our place in it. If we are convinced that we are alone, then we probably will be alone. And I want you to know that over the past recent months, I experienced just the opposite. Personally, I see friends and allies stepping forward with newfound courage and conviction, from faith leaders to elected officials to social media influencers. Young and old, ordinary Canadians are more and more speaking plainly about the Jewish people in Canada and in Israel. I'm feeling less and less alone, in fact. To be different is not to be alone. Indeed, it is only by being what we uniquely are that we contribute to humankind what we alone can provide. Singular, distinct, countercultural, yes, all these things are part of the Jewish experience, but alone, no. That would be a curse and not a blessing. There is one more way, at least one more way, to read Bilam's words. Hein am levadad yishkon. There is a people who dwells alone is its usual translation, but if we repoint and repunctuate this phrase, and remember that's fair game in the rabbinic tradition, then we discover not a blessing or a curse, but rather a challenge. Hein am levadad, ... or colon, yishkon, exclamation point. When you are a people who feels alone, yishkon, dwell, settle in. Not if, but when you are a people who feels alone in the world, not if, but when you feel yourselves to be misunderstood or misjudged, yishkon, settle into your Judaism. Dwell right there at the heart of it. Double down on your Jewish identity and Jewish practice. Live as a Jew. Do Jewish. And you will find not only self-respect and good company and renewed confidence and true community, but you will also earn the respect of the majority of non-Jewish neighbors and co-workers and fellow citizens everywhere. This good advice is reinforced by the prophet Micah in our Haftarah. You know what to do. It isn't complicated, he says. When you feel alone, who you are and what you stand for and what you believe in somehow becomes clearer and clarified. The prophet reassures us, saying, you know what is good, matov. You know what God requires of you. Only these three things. Asot mishpat, do what is just. Ahavat chesed, love mercy. V'hatznea lechet im Elohecha, and walk humbly with your God. Let us find our ways to just these three until all the world will look on and say, Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov. How lovely are your tents, O Jacob, mishkenotecha Yisrael, your dwelling places, O Israel. Good people. In some centuries of history, in some moments of a lifetime, we feel ourselves blessed and sometimes cursed. Let today's reality not be mistaken for a blessing. It isn't. What we are experiencing now is no blessing. But let us not be discouraged either. It is not a curse. If we believe ourselves to be the object of a curse, then we are truly alone and lonely. So rather, let us take up the call and take up the challenge. Yishkon, dwell, live, survive, thrive. Am Yisrael Chai.